for Willy, I don't think there was a division. His life was always open to other people, intellectually and personally, and so, like I said, he would host, he loved the holidays. He loved Thanksgiving, he loved to cook big meals.
One of the key factors for Bill Longacre was he had great respect for his fellow human beings. He was gracious, courteous. He wanted to help. He wanted to listen to what you had to say. That's what we wanted for a graduate professor in archaeology.
I guess my earliest memories of Bill are just of a really pleasant, outgoing, funny guy wearing plaid shirts. I don't know why I always associate Bill Longacre with short-sleeve plaid shirts, but I do.
And in addition to those personal qualities, he brought with him a full understanding of what Binford had to say, an ability to decide what was the best of Binford's ideas and what was garbage, and the willing to sit down and talk to students about it. Well, what more could you ask in a good graduate program?
And so I remember just walking around Grasshopper with he and my dad, looking at the site and listening to them talk about it. And, you know, in part, I think that's what reinforced the archaeology bug in me professionally as well.
And the Super Bowl.
And the Super Bowl, that was almost a holiday. Green Bay was his team.
Mm-hmm.
He once gave an entire lecture in the history of archaeological theory wearing a cheese slice on his head. And Tim came to class and wore his Vikings helmet. So you had a student in class wearing this Viking helmet and Bill up front lecturing on God only knows what in archaeological theory, wearing this cheese slice on his head. Being very distinguished and not laughing ever. It was hilarious. But so he loved to cook big meals on his respective holidays, and he would always say the orphans are always welcome, and that was any student, anybody who didn't have a place to go.
And we'll let you start by just telling your name, and then start off with the first story you'd like to tell us.
My name is William A. Longacre. Many of my students call me Uncle Willy. That's a story later.
I want to go on record as saying I cannot provide any information relative to the origin of the name Uncle Willy. There are several stories out there, and several people independently take credit. I'm not sure who's right.
I was on the first floor. No, I was on the second floor. I was going somewhere, and the doors opened, and Bill was standing there. And, you know, because everybody called him Uncle Willy, so I walked in, I said, "Oh, hi, Uncle Willy, you don't know me, I'm Kacy." This was like literally the first time I met him. I was like, "You don't know anything about me, but I've heard so much about you." And he just went, What? Did you just call me Uncle Willy?" And I was like, "Oh my God. I am so sorry. I meant no offense, Dr. Longacre. I apologize, I'm so sorry." I think we were going up because, you know, his office was that's what it was, on the fourth floor. And I got off at the third floor because I was going to see Schiffer or something. And I turned around and I was like, "I just really want to apologize." And he goes, "You should come visit sometime, you know?" And he goes, "If you come by, I'll tell you why they call me that." And he winked at me and the door shut and you could hear him giggling, and he just likes to mess with people. And that was literally my first experience with Bill.
And by the way, I mean, I don't know whether anyone else can confirm this or not. One of the other theories is that he gave himself that name, which to me has always felt more logical than the others, that he, in some context, said to someone who said, "What should I call you?" "Just call me Uncle Willy. I'm your Uncle Willy." You know, I can absolutely see him saying that, and even if he didn't do it to himself, he never disagreed with that, and would, in other rather formal circumstances, insist on being called Uncle Willy.
That is a good story. I was director of the field school at Grasshopper from 1965 until I guess 79. And Jeff Reed was assisting me, and then he became the director. And I wasn't paying that much attention to what the students called me. I was not big on formality. And I knew that especially in the field, they all were calling me Uncle Willy. And so one day, this student drove in. We were not expecting him. He was a graduate student from, I don't even remember the school, but he had heard about Grasshopper and he drove in. I was in the back office working on accounts or some stupid thing. And one of the students, one of my students, knocked on the door and opened it up and brought this kid into the office and said, "Uncle Willy, this is Sam Jones. Sam Jones, this is Dr. William Longacre." And then it hit me. Bingo, something's going on here. And then finally I understood that what they were doing was inventing fictive kinship. An uncle, is a really nice guy, gives you presents, he doesn't do bad things to you, like your dad might do. Uncles are nice, And they were extending that because I was not that much older than these kids. Because when I started at Arizona in 1964, I was 26 and looked like I was about 14. So I had a terrible time with graduate students dealing with this, and I had a lot of trouble actually, because they were constantly, these old senior graduate students who had been there for years, who were actually older than I, were just horrified that this kid, who wasn't even a Howry student, they all anticipated that Howry would be replacing with a Howry student, not some crazy guy from Chicago who said you could do social organization from potsherds. Insane, crazy. And they really rebelled. So that's why students call me Uncle Willy. And the word has gotten out all over the place. I was lecturing in China at Peking University, Beijing. And this guy came up and he said, "Uncle Willy?"
And we both agreed that Bill would be the guy. And I forgot when, I don't remember whether it was around Christmas or around June.
I finished my doctorate in December, an awkward time to graduate. Now at this time, we're talking about the early 60s. Imagine, so long ago. A lot of jobs were discovered when you went to the AAA meeting. That particular year, it was held in San Francisco, November 1963. My degree was given in December of 63. So I went to San Francisco to throw myself into the meat rack, as they called it, to see if I could find a job interview maybe, and so on and so forth. When loudspeakers came on and say, "All anthropologists, please report to the Grand Ballroom." At that time, the AAA was not all that big like it is today. The president was Margaret Mead, who I actually knew fairly well. And she got up and announced that President Kennedy had been shot and that he had died, and the meeting was totally canceled. You will all go home now. So I had no job. I had nothing. And I thought, good God, what am I going to do? My father and mother came down from Houghton, Michigan. There was a nice train connection to Chicago. So they stayed with me in my slum apartment in Hyde Park in the south side of Chicago, not far from where Obama was working. And we were having coffee in the morning, and the phone rang.
And so we agreed on this, and so Emil said, okay, the following day, called up Bill.
Now imagine this. This was in the time before there were actually operators. You know, none of you youngers can imagine experiencing this. And you didn't have dials and things. You picked up the phone and you gave your number to the operator. I picked up the phone, and I could tell right away from the crackling that it was a long-distance call.
He was at home in Michigan. And he said, "This is Emil Howard at the University of Arizona. I'd like to speak to Dr. Longacre."
And the operator said, "This is a person-to-person call for Dr. William A. Longacre," my father's name and my name. So I said to the operator, "Ask him if they want the physicist or the anthropologist."
"Do you want the physicist or the anthropologist?"
And I heard this cackling laugh on the other end. "I want the archaeologist, damn it." It was Emil Howard calling on the phone. I didn't know there was a job at Arizona. I didn't know I was being looked at. I didn't know any of this. Some of my professors knew, but they were sworn to secrecy. And Howard offered me the job on the phone.
Bill got on the line, and Emil greeted him and told him that he wanted to offer him a job at the University of Arizona.
There was no interview, there was nothing. I'd never met the man.
And Bill was flabbergasted, and of course said yes. But
He called me and he asked me if I would like to join them at a salary of $7,500. But he hoped to get a little bit more by the time I got there. And he hoped that I would actually be able to start that summer. I accepted the job, and I was greatly relieved and enjoyed my graduation a lot more.
we didn't interview him. We didn't bring him to Arizona. We didn't have a panel of experts tell us whether we had made the right decision. We just did it.
And then Ray Thompson, who was running Grasshopper Field School, asked me to come and spend a few days at Grasshopper and share some stuff with the students, that sort of thing. So after time at Vernon, I drove into Grasshopper in this incredible car with the top down. I was wearing a Madras jacket, pullover, and I had the stereo playing, and I'm sure that everybody thought I was a madman. As I drove into Grasshopper, all this noise and the top down, and the students were quite bemused. They didn't know what to make of me. And Dr. Thompson asked me to present a lecture that night to the field school students. Now, among the students that particular year were Mark Leone and some other people who went on to become quite prominent members of the field. And I wanted, of course, to talk about my dissertation work, social organization, ceramic sociology, all that stuff I was so excited about. But Ray said, no, you have to tell them about the sequence of cultures in this area of Arizona where I had worked and done my dissertation. I didn't want to do it. So I very quickly sketched out that part of my work, and then spent much of the time talking about what I wanted to talk about. And the students later told me they had no idea what I was talking about. After the talk, Molly and Ray Thompson invited me down to the director's cabin for a drink. And I got there, and they were very apologetic. They said, since the field school is an extension of the campus, they decided that there would be no more alcohol. In the past, when people had gone there and given talks, they expected to be entertained at the director's cabin and have a drink. But in this case, he said, we've decided that that'll not be present anymore, except we didn't know it, but we left a bottle of tequila in the cabin, and it survived the winter. So we have tequila and some tepid water. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll have that. So So we had this horrible, awful drink, and nothing to go with it, of course. And I was sort of wondering, what kind of place is this? What have I gotten myself into? Ray was going to meet us. The highway was here, and the road to Sibiku was here and up to Grasshopper. So Ray was to meet us at that junction at the highway. So I'm driving along, we get to Globe, Arizona on the way, and Alana asked if it would be all right if she made a stop, Globe, at the liquor store. I said, well, okay. So we stopped, and she brought out a bag of bags, these little net bags, and she pulled them out, and one after another. She went in the liquor store and spent about $300 or $400 and bought all this liquor in these clanking bags. I thought, how are you going to get it into Grasshopper? She said, trust me. So we put all the bags in with all that booze, and off we went, and we got to the junction, and there was the old power wagon, Dodge power wagon that Ray liked to drive. And there was Ray slumped over the wheel, absolutely sound asleep. And Alana said, she quietly got to the back of the power wagon, opened up the back door, she very deftly put the liquor down in the back, closed the door very quietly, then we woke him. He had no idea what he was. That's the embarrassing part for Ray. He'd probably laugh at it now. So then I went back to Chicago, and I made the move down here.
John's dad was Stan Olsen, like the Stanley Olsen Zooarchaeology Lab over in the Arizona State Museum. And Stan Olsen would drive out to Grasshopper.
They drove up in a Volkswagen bus. There were animal horns and antlers hanging all over it, and I thought, this has got to be him. So I went over to the road, and sure enough. So I brought them over to the dig, because we were just fine screening an ashy area in a kiva that was full of these little teeny bones. I knew there were fishes and other things, little. So then we were putting them in coin envelopes as fast as we could, and cleaning them up. So he began looking, and he said, John, look at this, this is a mulva. And, oh look, there's a mulva. He stayed up half the night in the lab with these magnifying glasses going through all this stuff. He was overjoyed. It was filled with reptiles and amphibians and fish. And he was so excited. So he became a champion of Grasshopper from that point on. In fact, later John actually went there as a student. And he kept asking me, now Bill, you've got to get them to hire me at Arizona. He was at Tallahassee at Florida State. He said, you've just got to do it. Now don't forget. So he told me about a joke about a guy who went to an insane asylum. And he walked through the main gate and started up towards the main door. There was a guy out there doing landscape. And they began talking. He was perfectly normal and had a nice conversation with this guy. And the guy, he said to the guy, well, why are you here? You're not crazy. He said, I don't know. They just won't let me go. He said, well, I'll talk to them when I get inside. So he got to the door and all of a sudden, boom, got hit with a brick. And the guy said, don't forget. And then that was Stan's line to me, because he gave me a piece of stationery called Don't Forget, and he drew a flying brick on it. And it took a while, but we worked on it, and we got it. And then John actually did his dissertation on Grasshopper fauna at the Berkeley. Now he does more important stuff in Tibet and China.
Because, so the thing that Willy did, Willy started changing things at Grasshopper. He wanted to adopt a different excavation strategy. So instead of, excavating high volumes of sediment and clearing lots of space, he was meticulous. I I think he felt like he was judged by some of the old school guys, like the culture historians like Doc Howery, who would move a lot of dirt, open up a structure, study it. Because, Willy was of the school that you could learn stuff from the minutia of the archaeological site. And so, it was important to him. So they started screening with finer screens. Part of that was they were recovering smaller animal bones than they would previously. And so, Stan Olsen would come out and he would be collecting for comparative collections, that's what's over at the ASM. But he would see, he'd say, down the dirt road you could see this van coming, the door would slide open, and out would pop this little kid in his short shorts. And Willy loved to tell the story because it was John. So he's literally known John Olsen since he was a small child.
Wearing short shorts.
Wearing short shorts. He always pointed, it was always about the short shorts.
We began hiring Apaches to help us in the work at Grasshopper. And Keith Basso by then was at Cibicu working with him.
I mean, his field school stories about the time at Grasshopper, he told a lot, and they were all really good. I mean, Ray Thompson.
Time the Apache stole the beer. One guy in particular got just really rowdy and took one of the camp Suburbans and tried to drive off into the night.
And one night, probably 1 or 2 in the morning, I was awakened at the director's cabin. In those times, we left the keys in the vehicle. He had taken a university vehicle, one of our carryalls, and was last seen on the way to Civicu. And oh my God. So I got up, got dressed, and with a couple of staff members, we went after it. About halfway to Civicu, we found a dead cow.
And hit a cow, killed the cow, which was really, really bad.
Yeah, that was a big deal for them.
But hit the cow such that here's its rear end, it turned.
The cow apparently was standing on the side of the road, and he turned backwards to look, and the front left side of the car hit him in the head.
It evacuated its bowels into the open window, covering
And the interior of the field vehicle.
the interior of the field vehicle and the Apache guy with cow dung.
So I thought, oh wow, now we got deep doo-doo. So I get to Cibicu, we couldn't find him. I woke up the Apache police, and they were really mad. Not at me, but at him. And we couldn't find it. So finally, maybe 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, I went back to Grasshopper. There was the truck. The front left was smashed a bit, but the worst part was apparently when the cow was at his back to the car, when he got hit in the head, his bowel movement got, and all the windows were open, the inside of the truck was filled with oompa, we call it. Ooh. It was a horrible mess. So I made him, of course. He was hungover, but I made him clean it out very carefully with water and soap. But how to deal with the university garage? I had to make a report on this because the front left had a big crash and the light was broken. So I thought, if I tell them what happened, it's going to be just awful. So I decided I'll tell them white lie. Tell them that it was raining and slippery and I slid into a tree, and that's what happened. They knew I was lying, but what the hell.
The bird had been to Greece and had seen some archaeology and expressed an interest. Her father contacted Harvard to find out where she could get an archaeological experience. And they got the Peabody Museum, and Joe Brew was the director, and he said, well, Arizona.
White House had called the SAA and asked what is the finest archaeological field school in the country. And the SAA had said University of Arizona. So they called to make arrangements for the daughter of the president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, to come out for a period of time to be at the field school as a special student. You don't say no to that.
So we were contacted. I went to the White House and met with their social secretary. We had certain conditions. She was to be treated like every other student. The news media were not to be there.
All these Secret Service. There was one Airstream trailer that was nothing but a radio. It was this giant big radio with an antenna that went up about 100 miles, so they could talk anywhere in the world. And then they had people from a magazine that she was supposed to be writing for, and other hangers on. So it was a big encampment. And then we had Lindbergh for a little over 2 weeks, the summer of '65. And that was an incredible experience. We were instructed not to say anything about it to anybody until the White House announced this. And that was literally the time when we met her in Globe with the new students, picked them up. The students didn't know about this until they got there, and they were pretty well freaked out. And we met this big contingent, and we all went to Grasshopper.
They had to reconstruct the road into Grasshopper to bring in a communications trailer for the Secret Service so that she would, I mean, this is 1968, right? This is not even the era of satellite phones. I have no idea what the technology was, but she needed to be in constant communication with the White House.
They hired a guy out of retirement who had run the most important travel affairs for the Airstream trailer company. And they had some Airstream trailers.
And the Secret Service had their camp down near where the students were staying. And so they had a big television set that they put out on the lawn or on the ground in front of the trailer with multiple screens. So you could get whatever they want. And of course they were in constant touch. Lady Bird was in the Virgin Islands, and every night Linda Bird talked to her with this radio that could reach anywhere. And
they brought along a U.S. Army communications unit, and her father called her every day. And a couple of times he would call her, and the communications guy would come into the lab, and she would say, well, tell him I'm working on a project, and I'll talk to him later.
I mean, she was really delightful. She did her damnedest to be a normal student. She ate with us, and the secrets, they all did.
Wash her hair, she was just another person digging at Grasshopper, to the extent that it was possible. I don't think there was any of this rah-rah business that you expect to get in situations like that. She was a very humble person.
And Linda Bird did not want to be treated in any special way. She stayed in the same cabin with the other female students. She ate at the same table as everybody. She took showers together. It was like she did not want to be treated special. And the Secret Service were always, mindful of their responsibility to her, right?
And of course we had the Secret Service, which complicated things. We had a very good relationship with all of them. The Secret Service came to the field school before she arrived and wanted to know about everything. And most of them were Texans, and they were very nice guys. But they were very leery of us professors. And so they want to know, well, what are you going to do while she's here? Well, every Sunday we took people on a field trip, and the first field trip, which occurred to her first Sunday, was to go all the way over to the Sierra Ancha, to walk over to a ruin, a cliff ruin, which was pretty spectacular. And it was a tough hike. And So these two Secret Service guys and Bill and I walked over to this cliff ruin. We nearly killed them. They were exhausted. They had no idea that you had to climb over lava blocks and all of this stuff.
The Secret Service liked me, and they invited me before dinner down for ginger ale, which was their code. Everything has codes for the Secret Service. Ginger ale meant booze, and we could watch the evening news with Huntley and Brinkley, you know. And so I was down there. It was around 5:30-ish. We usually ate around 6. And we had 2 young undergraduates, anthro majors, that we hired to be roustabouts to help in the camp. They washed the dishes, they set the tables, they, you know, did whatever had to be done. And that particular evening, they had done everything to get prepared for the dinner. They had a little time on their hands. And they were out playing catch with a hardball and gloves. And for some reason, being kids, I guess, young adult males, they started to throw the ball ever harder at one another. And finally, one of them missed the ball, and it slammed into the plywood wall of the laboratory and made a bang. And it sounded not unlike a gunshot. Now, the Secret Service had warned me that they were getting lots of hate mail and threats coming in. They showed me some of it. It was just vile. It was awful. Some of it was coming into the Civic Post Office. Some of it was, anyway, saying that they were going to sneak in the woods and shoot Lindbergh and all that. Bang! I was sitting there having my ginger ale, and all of a sudden these Secret Service jumped up. They literally grabbed her like a sack of potatoes and threw her into the trailer. And there were 2 guys sleeping. They came out half-dressed with guns, and the 2 others were in the shower, and they came running down with towels with drawn guns. Within a matter of seconds, it was an incredible experience. Armed, all these Secret Service guys with guns.
The next thing you know, these Secret Service agents are running outside, holding towels around them with pistols, thinking that something terrible is going to happen to the president's daughter. I just remember, you know, Bill took unbelievable glee in the chaos that, you know, ensued as a result of that. These guys running around with shampoo in their hair and pistols and so forth.
Yeah. Then we finally figured out what it was, and then everybody got calm. Nothing much was ever said about that. But it was a very interesting experience. We were, LBJ was going to give a speech in San Francisco, and we had been told that there's some possibility he would stop and visit us, visit his daughter at the site. And he didn't, thank God, because that would have been horrible. Well, that's the Lindbergh story. That was quite exciting. And then after Lindbergh, and Ray was there for that period, Ray Thompson, new department head. After Lindbergh left, so did Ray. And he turned it over to me, and I became the new director of Grasshopper at that point.
You should tell the doghouse story.
Yeah, so when Willy was going to take over Grasshopper, he wanted to have you know, little cabins or something for the staff to stay in. And he was driving, I think, on I-19 towards San Javier for some reason, I don't remember why. He saw this guy on the side of the road and built these nice handmade doghouses. Like, no, at a larger scale, those would be perfect. And so he pulled off and he started talking to the guy and described it. He's like, yeah, can you build these bigger? And he said, yeah. And so he contracted him to build these giant doghouses, basically, which became then the Grasshopper staff cabins that ultimately moved to Pinedale, and that are actually then went back to the Apache reservation when the Pinedale Field School finally closed. But yeah, he was convinced this carpenter was like, yeah, just build these really big doghouses.
What's more intriguing to me are the stories that Bill wouldn't tell.
Bill Fash's birthday party.
Is still a mystery.
Well, not to a lot of people, but it is.
No, who were there, but
it has become a password, effectively. Grasshopper parties were wild. This was the wildest of them all. And that's about it. They were near-death experiences, a lot of nakedness, mud wrestling, some of which got really violent.
But according to Brian Griffin, there was naked, like they would talk about naked car washing. I have no idea how Willy corralled and supervised, especially the late 60s. I mean, the late 60s and early 70s. Can you even imagine? No story, but so you know, but Willy in his director's cabin was so proud because he liked comfort. He liked the finer things in life.
Yeah.
He just did. He also made camp. You know, Ray Thompson didn't run it as a dry camp. Willy is the one. He used to sneak booze in before he took over, and then, you know, he would go out. They would do booze runs. They would bring booze back. He would tell stories about pulling people's teeth, like all these ridiculous stories. But he liked the finer things in life. He liked to be comfortable, and so you know, you can't. It was always hard for me to imagine Bill living out and kind of camping all summer, running the field school. But he would take this inflatable mattress, and these are in the days before you had pumps. And so you literally would have to imagine inflating, you know, a large inflatable mattress, sitting there blowing into it like a beach ball. It took him forever, and he was so proud of it. So whenever he did, he had to leave, and you don't piss off your assistant director. So he left, and Graves was so pissed he went in and he deflated the bed. And Graves tells it, and he talks about how furious Bill was when he came back. But Willy tells the story and just giggles the whole time, because like anything that was bad that ever happened to him, he seemed to turn it around and make it funny.
I can remember many wonderful students. Many of them are quite prominent in the profession today. I mentioned Mark Leone. He did a sort of ceramic sociology doctorate thesis on his work in the Vernon area of Arizona. There were two engines sort of driving in this early period of the so-called new archaeology. There was the field school at Vernon, which was an undergraduate NSF-supported field school, undergraduate participation program field school for undergrads. When that happened, I decided I would change Grasshopper into a graduate student field school. Most of the graduate students graduated like in May and then came to the summer field school the summer before they actually started graduate school, but technically they were graduate students. And we got big NSF support for that as well.
Grasshopper was so influential. I mean, it was one of the top field schools. It went on for so long. You know, Jeffrey took over afterwards, after having been a TA for the field school. It must have trained hundreds of professional archaeologists and anthropologists have gone through there.
Let's turn to the fieldwork in the Philippines, the Kalinga work. That was glorious. I first went there in '73 during the summer after the Stanford experience. Neither American anthropologists working in the Philippines or Filipinos. During the work at the Field Museum, for example, my dissertation was at the Carter Ranch Pueblo site. A very famous, very prominent Philippine anthropologist who was doing his PhD in Chicago at the time, social anthropology. He came and worked with us that summer. His name is Hokano. Nobody could tell me for sure if they were still making the pottery in these Kalinga villages. They told me maybe in the more remote villages they might still be making it. So I reckon the only way I could really find out was to actually go and see. And that was an amazing experience. But I ended up taking a bus up to Kalinga land with a fellow from the village of Dangtalan, Chantayan in the local language. And it took us a couple of days on the bus to get to the place on the dirt road where we left the road and hiked on foot down into the village, about a half a day hike. I walked into that village and I can't tell you the experience, the excitement I felt, because everywhere I looked there was pottery. women were carrying pots on their head. Little kids were taking cooking pots to wash them. I mean, it was nirvana for what I wanted to do. The big problem was, would they let me come back and actually live there? Because they would have to take care of me. There was no Circle K, there was no Safeway. They would have to feed me, and so on. They also, it was a big deal because they were practicing the blood feud among other Kalinga areas. And so if they let me come and live there, they would have to agree to protect me, which is a very major, big thing. I didn't really know that then. So I was there about 2 weeks. And during that period, a young kid, in a village across the river, had swallowed an open safety pin and had bled to death eternally. Very sad. So there are 12 villages in that valley, and they all sort of see themselves as a very integrated, single place in a sense. So when something like this happens, each village sends a delegation to the funeral. And my Kalinga friends asked me if I would go as part of the delegation. And of course I knew that. And they said, bring your camera because the parents don't have a picture of their child. And they'd like you to take a picture of the corpse. Yeah. And we got there. In Kalinga funerals, maybe you forgot a similar, or Ilocos, I'm not sure. The cadaver is in a makeshift chair dressed in the finest garb inside the house, and the women are seated on the floor all around with this stylized wailing. It's just sends a sheer back into my hair. And also they have wands with little plastic strips to chase the flies away because there's no embalming. And the men all sit out in front on logs. And so I was brought over to a log and I sat. And I was, of course, being a good anthropologist, I was a trained observer. I was watching what was going on around me. And I noticed that there were young men carrying like a caddy with 6 glasses in it over to the side of the house where there was a row of big ceramic jars. And they were dipping this fluid out. It was just sort of a red color, had stuff floating in it, into these glasses. And then taking them out to the crowd of men who would chug a them and then put the glass down so they could run back and refill. So they brought it to me. All of a sudden everybody got suddenly quiet. And I took the glass and I chugged it. And I put it back, and they make a noise. When somebody does something really unexpected and sort of extraordinary, they make a funny guttural noise, and they made that noise. And it's just, and what did I do, you know? And the bunch from the village that I was with were so proud of me, because the only other white guy in that valley was at another village, and he was from the, what do they call them, linguists. Sorry about that, the linguists. What do they call themselves? SL something?
Oh, SIL.
SIL, yeah. He was one of them. He was translating the Bible. And he told the Kalinga, God doesn't want you to drink alcohol, doesn't want you to dance. Traditionally, Kalinga women went topless, and he was told that God didn't like that. So they expected me to be like that. So there I was. It was alcohol. It was bossy. It was a sugarcane wine with flowers in to make it a little bit spicy. It was delicious. So of course they immediately brought me another glass. Next thing I knew, I was by myself on this log. My friends had snuck away for some, and there was a man standing there. And I looked up. He was in a bahag, on a loincloth only. He was heavily tattooed. And he had a staff, and he had a miner's helmet on. And he asked me in Kansas accented English, would I mind if he sat with me? I said, of course not. So he sat down, he took off his helmet, and he began to interrogate me. And he first asked how Kalinga funerals compared to American funerals. So I did a comparative, contrastive, quick analysis off the top of my head. And I noticed that there were a lot of people translating in the crowd, because not everyone understood English. And then he asked several things, but the one that I'll never forget, he said, I understand that Americans had flown up to the moon, landed and got off and walked around on the moon and then came back. I said, yeah. And he looked at me and said, how in truth do you know that really happened? It turned out that there were members of the NPA, the New People's Army, in the area, and they knew that this American was coming. And they had told the Kalinga people, don't believe anything he says. He probably works for the CIA and blah, blah, blah. And he had told them that don't believe the stuff about the moon landing. So he looked at me expectantly. Now, just before I had left the university on this trip, at the main library, they had an exhibit of moon rocks that had traveling around universities at that time. It was in '73. And on the top of the cabinet, they had one rock that you could actually touch. And I said, well, I know it happened because they brought back pieces of the moon, and I not only saw them, I actually touched one. Wow. I couldn't say I saw it on TV, or these people had never seen television. There was no electricity, they'd never seen a movie. They'd never seen a traffic light. I mean, these people were quite remote. But that they understood. And, that went over well. And then we talked a bit more, and he got up, stood up again, and he said, I know you want to come back and do this study of our ceramics, blah, blah, blah. And I think I can speak for everybody here to tell you that although you look quite young, you seem very wise. And he said, I think we would welcome you to come back. And they made that noise again. And I knew, and the guys who were with me were so proud. And then they butchered a carabao. And I made a dreadful anthropological mistake. Because I was such an important guest in their eyes, those folks get the internal organs, the best part, the chopped up livers and kidneys and things that I won't eat. That was bad enough. And they'd string them on a piece of bamboo, bark, sort of, and tie it up so you can carry it. So then we hiked back to downtown in the village. I insisted on carrying my own. And they were quite angry. They were not angry, but they were upset. No, you can't do that. You have to let us carry it. I said, but they gave it to me. Terrible anthropological side. I was not in tune with the culture yet. And it was a terrible error because when you have somebody special, they're not supposed to carry their own meat into the village. Other people do that for you. Now I would know better at the time. So that was a very important and interesting experience. And it's made way for my actually being able to go back.
Certainly one of the things that Bill Longacre imbued in me was the recognition that, you have a responsibility to descendant communities. Even if you're studying the Stone Age, there are descendant communities, even if you can't trace them in a direct way. There are descendant communities who, with respect to issues as ephemeral and yet salient as construction of identity, national identity and ethnic identity, are depending on archaeological information, that the responsibility that we have as professional archaeologists definitely includes those kinds of relationships.
But the reason he invested so much in Zandro and Jenny is he saw them as being the future of archaeology and anthropology.
So the Kalinga Archaeology project, which, as I said, I believe was initiated in 1973 during a first summer of field work there, I think to this day remains a model of specifically ethnoarchaeological research, but beyond that, anthropological interaction with indigenous and descendant communities, precisely because from day one, as you said, Dr. Longacre took conscious steps to not patronize, but genuinely include in the entire process, from construction of the research design through publication, indigenous peoples, which in the Philippines is very complex, not just Kalinga, but other peoples as well.
Yeah, I see it in kind of two dimensions there. One that is very human dimension, that he saw the capability in Sandra and Jenny and
Hecky.
Boboy, and well, Hecky I think came of his own accord.
I think so.
So Sandra, Jenny, and Boboy especially, that he wanted to support, right? That here were really capable people who weren't going to have the opportunities to achieve what is possible with their intellectual abilities otherwise, and he could help them, and so he wanted to help them. He's just that generous. But the other was definitely about capacity building in the Philippines. He very much wanted to provide a legacy of a stronger and broader anthropological and archaeological, but especially anthropological research and academic community in the Philippines. He was supportive of the one that was there, and he was well connected. From May to October every year after he retired, he was teaching, originally in the anthropology department until internal politics made that problematic, and then in the archaeological studies program. But to do his part to help with capacity building and supporting the program there. And his hope was that when Jenny and Zandra finished, they would go back and keep building on that, and then have their own students.
And so I know for a fact that throughout his life, maybe the thing that Bill was most proud of was his enduring affiliation with the University of the Philippines, the interactions that he had with scholars there, and the impact that he had on the development of modern archaeology in the Philippines. And I would say that pride is very definitely well justified.
His sense of humor is very much part of who he was.
He, in particular, loved puns, and the stupider the pun, the better.
I miss his horrible, horrible puns. They were so bad. He would groan, and they were so bad he would start laughing.
He would just embrace and relish and Cheshire cat-like come up with these puns that were just like, I mean, beyond groaners. They were just embarrassingly bad. And
Did he have any favorites?
No, because
they were for all occasions.
They were because
They were.
It's not like he memorized a repertoire of like horrible puns. He's of that generation that he would just come up with them on the fly.
And I'm desperately trying to remember one for you, but I'm having trouble off the top of my head. But you know, he would do that. I mean, come up with something just off the top of his head based on the context that you're in, and say this thing, and everyone would go, "Oh my God."
If he, he loved Facebook. Like I said, so much of him was like dated in certain ways. And I don't want to say dated, but he was just like, he had this classical thing going on, you know, like vintage would be a good word. But then he was obsessed with like the newest of the new. So when Facebook came out, he loved it. And so he engaged with his community all the time on Facebook. And literally, if you scroll through Facebook feeds, if you posted something, he would find a way to make a horrible pun. And so literally every week with Elliot Atlas, like we would post something and there would be a terrible pun there. And it wasn't, none of it was memorized. It was like he was constantly creating them.
I value Bill's friendship more than anything else. Bill was an incredibly dear friend to my whole family for a half a century. And so it's hard for me to separate the personal and the professional.
But I miss his mentorship. I feel like I'm without an intellectual parent, which is really hard. And even though it would drive me nuts, he teases everybody, or he teased everybody, but he did it out of love and respect, and I miss that energy.
So, yeah, I mean, I just think that his friendship was really at the core of what's important to me. But at the same time, it's a bit hard for me to separate out because Bill Longacre, along with just a couple of other people, my dad, C. Vance Haynes, Glenn Isaac, a couple of other people, were absolutely fundamental in forming my sense of what it takes to be a professional anthropologist.
In terms of the kind of good-natured, unwavering support, kind that you can get not from a parent but from from an uncle.
I came here as an undergraduate in 1973, and Bill Longacre was the advisor for my undergraduate honors thesis. And so I worked with him on that. I took 1 or 2 classes from him as an undergraduate. I went to the field school in 1975 when he was still the director.
What I have learned the most from Bill, I think really has to do with attitude towards life and science, and what I was saying about the importance of humility and being open-minded. I think it takes a lot of self-confidence and comfort in one's own skin to be able to do that, and he had it. He had it in spades.
I succeeded him as department head. He taught me a lot of what I needed to know about how to be a department head. So at all of the critical stages of my career, including the obvious ones like getting a job, promotion and tenure, promotion to full professor, he was there. I'm not sure there's any other single human being that had a more profound effect on me as a professional archaeologist, as an anthropologist, than Bill Longacre.
My concluding thought is I want the younger people that watch this to know how influential he was. You know, he started as a Southwesternist. He didn't think of himself as an archaeologist. He was going to be an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist, and he just kept getting work in the summers on, it was the field museum projects, right? And so, but he starts in the Southwest. He then, you know, because of his interest in pottery and kinship, you know, gets into ethnoarchaeology, so he transfers kind of to Asia. But he knew and had, even people he disagreed with, he knew people who worked in all different regions. He knew people around the world. He would engage with them, even if they disagreed. And so there are other models for how to be an academic and how to be a professional. I think he's a really great role model. And I don't think, you know, his loss I have colleagues in the plains in the southeast, and who were really upset by it. It is because you can work in a region, you can do things, you can disagree with people, but you can touch other people's lives. And I think that's what he did.
Opened it up for me to go back. So, and I knew I had to strike fast because God knows what was coming around the corner. So I got a big NSF grant, and I took 6 U of A graduate students back. And we worked for that year. And one of them is Miriam Stark, who's now at Hawaii. One of them is James Skibo, who's a big-time guy at Illinois State. Jim Skibo, one of my favorite students, because he's a Yooper also, from not far from where I grew up. And he's married to this wonderful woman, Becky, his wife, who's a teacher, grade school teacher. And she actually came, well, Jim was in the field to visit, like during Christmas break or something, for a few weeks. And the Kalinga were so upset that they didn't have a baby, they didn't have a child. They'd been married for several years. So they insisted that Becky and Jim make a pilgrimage to this site up above us in the mountains, where Kabunyan, the great god that used to walk around, was thirsty, so he thrust his spear into the rock and produced a spring. A magic spring, because if women are barren, they go there and drink that water, they get babies. So they insisted that they go there, and to humor the Kalinga, they did. And they went and they drank the water, and then okay. So we got back to Arizona, and by God, Becky got pregnant. Oh, that was great fun. Well, let's see, where are we now? I don't